Hello again, my name is Candace Savonin. I'm the lead instructor for this course, and in this chapter, we're going to talk about best practices for sharing images. This is the licensing information again. Okay, so we're going to talk about recognizing the importance of keeping protected data safe as it relates to images. We're going to try to understand best practices for containerization. We're going to contrast the different online destinations for sharing a Docker image. And then we're going to change the name of a Docker image. We're going to practice how to do that. And then we're going to push a Docker image to Docker Hub for sharing purposes. You can share whatever repository might make sense for your project or for the spheres you work in. That might vary, but we're just going to show you how to share on Docker Hub. All right, so this is activity 3. You're going to go through these instructions in the course. All right, so what does this look like? We talked about Docker pulling is bringing an image from the internet to our local computer, so it stands to reason that pushing is then pushing that back up to the internet. So sharing a Docker image with the world. Here is the most important slide that I will have in this whole thing, okay? If you work with protected data types, so that means personally identifiable information, personal health information, or just like anything else that should not be shared with other people, do not put these on your Docker images, especially if you're going to share them. There are workarounds that you need to know about. Okay, so here's some alternatives, right? Instead of putting on your publicly shared Docker image, you could put the data on your image, but just not share it anywhere. I don't like that as much because then it could be very easy for you to just push it. So just like, first of all, I think option number 1, just don't put the data on the image at all. Option 2, just if you really for some reason have to put it on there, but again, we've showed you about volumes, so you could just do a volume and then that doesn't involve the data being on there. And then, but don't push it anywhere, right? That's an option. You could push it to a secure and protected site, right? AWS, Singularity, they have options to keep your images private, so that's another option for you. And the main thing is when it comes to security, the more layers of safety, the better. So maybe ideally you do all of these things. It really kind of depends on the situation, but definitely talk to experts like your IRB, your security professionals that you might have access to at your institution. Just talk to them if you are working with these kinds of data types. If you aren't working with any kinds of protected data types and you're sure of that, and again, that could include API keys, other kinds of personal access tokens. That also you don't want to be on there. But anyway, if you aren't working with any of that stuff, then I'm sorry that I spent so much of this time, but this is just so important. So we have to make sure that people know this information. Okay, storage options. This is just a very, very quick rundown. Please look into these because, again, we're going through Docker and Docker Hub in this course, but that might not be what suits your project needs. So please look into them. This is my very quick rundown on them. As you can see, it's not even like a full sentence. So Docker Hub, widely used. It's kind of a default because it's been around. So that's kind of what it's kind of a go-to. Nothing wrong with it. But if you have some different needs for your project, you might want to consider something else. So Amazon Web Services. If you're already using AWS for something, that might be a great option. It does have also options for keeping it private. So that maybe that's why you want to use it. It depends. Again, and then there's also GitHub Container Registry. Again, if you're already using GitHub for other things, you might use it. But it also, GitHub Actions, for example, uses stuff with Docker perfectly fine. So using GitHub alone may not be a reason enough for you to use GitHub Container Registry, but maybe the reason is just that you like it and it works well for your team. So look into it. And then Singularity, now called Apptainer, has really kind of been known as being a high security one. It has a few extra layers of security and options that you might want to look into should that be a concern for you. All right. So how do we do this? How do we share an image? we can sign in, and then you can change the name of your image so it has a tag, right? Because we want to make sure we have our version tags so we can keep track of things. So you can have your current name and then your new name. And then if you want to use Docker Hub, you can just push it to the hub using this button. Or on command line, you can do Docker push with the name of the image. So here's again a bit of a rundown of best practices for containers. Absolutely do not put protected data on your shared image. You could store the data separate. You can make your images private. Definitely consult your data privacy experts, whoever those might be. Find them. And it might be somewhere else, but it's so important. I can't stress that enough. Don't make one super large Docker image that covers all your use cases. This is going to be such a headache for you if you do this. Use smaller. You can make as many Docker images as you want. So make a bunch of small ones. It's very nice to have them modular, right? So let's say, for example, you're making certain steps or a certain workflow. Make an image for each workflow, kind of organize it that way. Use a naming convention to kind of keep them organized in that way. Think carefully about build efficiencies, because here's the thing about the super large Docker images. If one thing is broken, say you have one dependency that needs to be fixed, you're going to have to rebuild the whole thing. So if it gets really big, that's going to take you a long time to rebuild or test or troubleshoot, because anytime you're troubleshooting it, you might be rebuilding it a bunch of times before it to work. So, make it small, no big deal. It also, just will be easier for you to share, because you could, a small image is, you could just download it in seconds, okay? All right, do not keep your Docker files stored locally and untracked, right? Use version control to track those, or whatever your platform of choice is. It doesn't have to be GitHub. Just keep them tracked somewhere. Use versioning tags. Use a system. Make a system that works for you. It doesn't have to be what everybody else uses, but just something. I personally like to use tags like main, or whatever works for you. And then use trusted sources. Okay, there are a lot of people who make Docker images out there, and not all of them are nice, good people. Sometimes there's people trying to do bad things and have, malicious software on their Docker images. So just stick with your trusted sources, developers. If it's a big brand name that that you can verify that that's who it is. If it's GitHub or RStudio or Posit or Python or something, something where you can verify that that's the person, then that's great. Or if it's just somebody that's also fine, as long as you know that that person is not trying to do anything crazy. So, so that's our best practices. You'll read more about that in the chapter.